Picture a busy intersection on a gray Tuesday morning. Cars stream past in both directions, engines blending into the general noise of city life that most people have long since stopped hearing. But there is a man standing at a bus stop who is not most people. His head turns slightly before a single vehicle even comes into view around the corner. Something in the sound has already told him what is coming. A few seconds later, a 1998 Honda Civic hatchback rolls into sight, its distinctive engine note cutting through the ambient noise with a familiarity that feels almost like a voice. The man barely reacts. To him, this is simply hearing. To everyone around him, it would look like a superpower. There is a specific type of person in this world who does not need to see a car to know what it is. They hear the idle of an engine at a red light and they know the displacement. They catch the exhaust note of something accelerating on a distant highway, and they can narrow it down to 3 possible models before it ever appears. This is not a performance. It is not a trick developed for attention. It is the result of something happening deep inside a particular kind of mind, a mind that processes the world through layers of attention, emotional memory, and obsessive pattern recognition that most human beings never develop. To understand why some people build this ability, it is necessary to understand what sound actually means to the human brain. Sound is not passive information. It is emotionally loaded data. The brain does not simply receive sound the way a microphone does. It filters it, compares it against stored memories, attaches emotion to it, and files it away for future reference. This process happens automatically and constantly. But for most people, the sounds of engines fall into the background category, white noise to be ignored. For people with genuine automotive passion, something different happens entirely. The engine sounds never get filed into the background. They stay in the foreground. They stay interesting, and over years of sustained attention, the brain begins to build an internal library of sonic signatures that becomes extraordinarily precise. There is a woman named Sophia who grew up in a small town in northern Spain where her father ran a repair workshop. She spent her childhood sitting in that garage watching her father work. She was not learning formally. Nobody handed her a textbook or quizzed her on engine specifications. She was simply present. She listened. Over thousands of hours across years of childhood and adolescence, her brain was quietly cataloging sounds the way other children cataloged faces or song melodies. By the time she was a teenager, she could walk past a running vehicle and know immediately if something was wrong with it, often before the driver had any idea. What Sophia developed was not special talent in the traditional sense. It was neurological specialization, driven by sustained emotional engagement. This is where psychology becomes genuinely fascinating. Researchers who study expertise and skill development have found that the human brain physically rewires itself in response to sustained attention. This is not a metaphor. The neural pathways associated with processing certain types of information grow denser and more efficient the more they are used. In musicians, the auditory cortex actually enlarges with years of practice. In taxi drivers, regions associated with spatial navigation expand. The brain of someone who has spent 20 years listening intently to engines is measurably different from the brain of someone who has not. The ability to identify cars by sound is not a quirk. It is the physical consequence of a mind that found something deeply meaningful and kept paying attention to it. But why do some people find engine sounds meaningful in the first place? This is the psychological question that reaches much deeper. For many of these individuals, the attachment to engine sounds begins in childhood and is inseparable from memory and emotional experience. The sound of a particular engine carries an entire emotional world inside it. It might be the sound of a father returning home from work, the specific note of the family car pulling into the driveway on Christmas evening, or the distant growl of a vehicle that represented freedom and adulthood to a 12-year-old watching from a bedroom window. These early emotional imprints embed certain sounds into the memory with extraordinary depth and permanence. Years later, hearing a similar engine does not simply register as an auditory event. It activates something that feels almost like recognition of a person. The sound has identity, it has history, it has meaning that goes far beyond mechanical noise. There is a concept in psychology known as episodic memory, which refers to memories attached to specific personal experiences rather than abstract facts. Unlike semantic memory, which stores general knowledge, episodic memory is colored by emotion and context. Researchers have found that emotionally charged memories are stored with far greater detail and durability than neutral ones. For someone who experienced powerful emotional moments connected to specific vehicles or sounds, the engine note becomes permanently encoded alongside the feeling. This is why a middle-aged man can hear the specific idle of an old V8 engine and feel something move in his chest before he has even consciously identified what he heard. The feeling arrives before the thought. Consider a man named Thomas from Detroit who works as a software engineer and has never professionally touched a car in his life. Yet colleagues describe watching him stop mid-conversation in a parking lot, tilt his head, and correctly identify the year, range, and model of a vehicle pulling in behind them before turning around. When asked how he does it, Thomas struggles to explain because for him it does not feel like knowledge. It feels like recognition, the same effortless recognition most people have when they hear a familiar person's laugh in a crowded room. Thomas grew up in a household where his grandfather, a retired mechanic, would sit on the front porch every evening and narrate the traffic. That grandfather turned every passing car into a story, a lesson, a conversation. Thomas absorbed those thousands of hours of shared attention into a sonic vocabulary that became permanent. This points towards something important about the social and relational dimensions of this ability. Very few people develop this kind of acoustic automotive expertise in isolation. Most of them developed it in relationship, with a parent, a grandparent, an older sibling, a mentor in a workshop. The sounds became meaningful partly because sharing them was meaningful. The car sounds are inseparable from the human connection that surrounded them. This is why the ability often feels more like a form of memory than a form of knowledge. It does not feel learned. It feels inherited. The community that forms around this kind of shared sensory expertise is psychologically distinctive. People who can identify cars by sound tend to find each other with remarkable efficiency. They recognize something in each other's attention, a particular quality of listening that marks the insider immediately. These communities are not built on competition or status in the conventional sense. They are built on shared perception. The currency is sensitivity, the ability to notice what others miss. In a world that increasingly rewards loudness and visibility, there is something quietly rebellious about a group of people whose deepest conversations are built around listening. There's also an identity component that deserves careful attention. The ability to hear what others cannot is not simply a skill. It becomes part of how a person understands themselves. For many people who possess this ability, it is one of the clearest expressions of who they are, a daily reminder that their way of moving through the world is different, that they carry a particular kind of knowledge embedded not in books or screens, but in the body itself. Psychologists who study identity formation note that skills which feel embodied, which live in the instincts rather than the intellect, tend to anchor identity with unusual strength. When someone asks these individuals how they do it, the honest answer is that they do not entirely know. It has become part of how they exist. There is a quieter truth underneath all of this that the psychology points towards steadily. In an age defined by visual saturation, by screens and images and constant visual stimulation, the people who listen this deeply to the mechanical world represent something almost countercultural. They have not let the auditory world fade into background noise. They have kept it alive and rich and full of meaning. Every engine they identify is proof that years of attention leave permanent marks on a human mind, that sustained love for something shapes perception in ways that cannot be undone. The sound of an engine for these people is never just noise. It is a language they spent a lifetime learning without ever sitting down to study it. And in that quiet, ongoing act of listening, they are keeping something human and irreplaceable alive in a world that moves too fast to hear itself.